The power dynamic in Washington shifts today. A new Congress is sworn in, Democrats take control, and a familiar face becomes the new Speaker of the House.
That's right. There was doubt and debate within the Democratic Party, but former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is expected to become House Speaker once again. She's the only woman to have held that position from 2007 to 2011, and the first thing on her agenda will be to introduce legislation to end this partial government shutdown. But Pelosi's made it clear that when it comes to the president's border wall funding, she is not budging.
We're joined in the studio by NPR congressional reporter Kelsey Snell. Good morning, Kelsey.
Hey, good morning.
So we're going to get to the shutdown and the wall, but first I want to talk about what Nancy Pelosi has actually already done, even before assuming the speakership. She's made some rule changes. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so Democrats plan to get all of these new rules in place as actually one of their very first orders of business. It's all part of this push that they're making to make government work better. They say that they want to kind of overhaul the ethics rules for Congress so that people can have more trust in people who make the laws, something that a lot of people don't have right now.
Right. So what rules are going to make us do that?
Yeah, so they hope to gain some trust by creating a kind of stark comparison between Republicans and Trump. And a big part of that is they want to make it easier to increase the debt limit. Now, we have had this fight over and over, it seems like, where there's a question about whether or not the government is actually going to make payments on debt that it already has.
Right.
Their new rule would make it so that it automatically happens when they pass a budget. So that's the big first one that will probably impact people's lives the most. It'll also make it harder for them to kick out a Speaker of the House. And they want to make sure that no more members or staff can serve on corporate boards. They think that would kind of separate Congress from private industry a little bit better. And they would extend bans on discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and allow religious headwear to be worn on the floor of the House. That's for largely to accommodate a request from Ilhan Omar, who is a representative who will be sworn in from Minnesota.
Who covered? Yeah. So let's talk about the shutdown.
Yeah.
Because this really is the business at hand. She's going to make all these rule changes, which is all fine and good, but there is a partial government shutdown, and she is going to try. Is it an earnest effort to try to get the government to reopen with this legislation?
Well, she referred to it as a Republican way to reopen the government. Basically, she wants to give Republicans the option of saying, hey, we're going to pay for 6 of the 7 parts of the government that are closed down right now. Let them be opened, fund them for the rest of the year.
Things that don't have anything to do with border security.
Right, and leave the border security fight to go on for just about another month. Give them 1 month to work out the Department of Homeland Security. But the president has basically already said that he's not interested in doing that. And, the Republicans in the Senate say they don't want to vote on anything that doesn't have the president's support. So it may not go much further than the vote today.
All right. One other story I want to ask you about. The New York Times published a piece yesterday about the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders in 2016, saying that there were these claims of sexual harassment, pay disparity by staffers. What are you learning about this?
Well, the complaints were in particular made by female staffers who talked about mistreatment, sexual harassment, and being paid much less than their male counterparts. And the Sanders campaign is not denying any of this. They are talking about how the campaign grew too fast, and they've released a statement saying that harassment and discrimination are not tolerated by Bernie Sanders himself, and that they took some steps in 2016 to fix the problems, but they're also guaranteeing that anything going forward, whether it's a new campaign or just his work in the Senate, that there will be efforts to make sure that there is more parity between men and women and make sure that there's no discrimination of any kind.
But he hasn't said one way or the other if he's going to run for
president.
He has not.
Again. That was not part of the statement.
All right. NPR's Kelsey Snell. Thanks so much, Kelsey.
Thank you.
All right. So as we have been talking about this, the whole reason for the shutdown is the fight over the border wall.
Yeah, there was this meeting between President Trump and congressional leaders yesterday, but there was no progress. The president wants a wall funded, and Democrats say no. The thing that has gotten lost in this debate is whether or not a wall could actually keep migrants out of this country.
Right. And we have talked about this before, but it is worth reminding all of us exactly what is happening on the border. What's the state of the actual barrier there and what would be effective? So no other person can better serve us in this moment than NPR correspondent John Burnett on the line from Texas, who's spent his fair share at the border. Hey, John. So even as recent as yesterday, President Trump tweeted that the wall's already being built. What is there now?
Well, when the president talks about the urgency of a border wall, remember that a third of the border is already covered by some sort of wall. You've got 700 miles of barriers down here. There are vehicle barriers in the remote areas of the West Desert and pedestrian fencing. They range from chain link fences that are easy to cut, these 12 to 18-foot tall iron bollard fences. You can see through them, and they're very hard to get over. And that's the standard construction for the replacement fencing now. Remember, most of the big border cities are already walled off, like San Diego and El Paso and Brownsville. These were the most popular crossing points because undocumented immigrants could blend in with the urban population. And Customs and Border Protection uses all kinds of other technology. They've got video cameras mounted on poles that are monitored remotely, sensors buried in the ground and embedded in the walls, these big spy blimps tethered in the sky that look into Mexico, and of course, some 16,000 agents along the southern border that are watching and tracking.
But even Democrats agree that border security needs to be improved. So clearly, even all that technology isn't passing muster. It's not securing the border to the level that Democrats and Republicans would like to see.
Well, remember that illegal immigration is still down 80% from its peak in 2000, and there are just fewer and fewer incidents of chasing single males through the brush, which is what, it used to be all about. What we're seeing now is an uptick of these families and children that are arriving from Central America asking for asylum. And the thing is that most people who cross illegally, Rachel, are apprehended not trying to evade the Border Patrol. They're looking for these green-suited agents. And in the Rio Grande Valley, the wall is not even on the river. It can be a half-mile inland. So they're already in the United States before they even see the wall.
So let's get back to this claim. The president keeps insisting that the wall, meaning his wall that he wants, the big physical barrier to run the extent, that it's already being built. Is that true?
Well, what's under construction mostly is the replacement. And in San Diego, you see it. They're replacing these old Vietnam-era landing mats with these big steel bollards. Same thing in El Paso. They're replacing chain link fencing. There are 33 new miles of border fencing that are being built down in the Rio Grande Valley, though.
So there are parts of the border, you and I both know, that our natural terrain is just so treacherous, really.
Yeah.
It would make it impossible to build a wall in some of the areas, right?
Right. And in the flat areas, that's where it's practical. But many border agents will tell you that a wall is just not necessary or feasible in these remote mountainous areas. The terrain is its own deterrent, like the Chisos Mountains in the Big Bend area of far west Texas and the San Ysidro Mountains east of San Diego. It's the terrain that slows people down, and that enables agents to apprehend them.
All right, NPR's John Burnett for us in Texas. Thanks so much, John.
You bet.
All right, we're going to turn now to Russia, where American officials are trying to figure out why a U.S. citizen was detained there last week.
Russia says Paul Whelan was detained during, quote, an act of espionage. Whelan's family says absolutely not. He was in Russia for a wedding. The U.S. ambassador to Russia visited Whelan yesterday for the first time. And meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that American diplomats are waiting for more answers from their Russian counterparts.
We've made clear to the Russians our expectation that we will learn more about the charges, come to understand what it is he's been accused of, and if the detention is not appropriate, we will demand his immediate return.
All right, we've got Moscow reporter Charles Maynes on the line with us to talk about this. Hey, Charles.
Good to be with you. Hi.
What was communicated in that meeting between U.S. Ambassador Huntsman and Paul Whelan? Do we know?
Well, we don't know too much. So the State Department released a statement that said that U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman had visited with Mr. Whelan in Lefortovo prison. This is a Tsarist-era prison with a long history for holding alleged spies and political prisoners in Russia. Mr. Huntsman had expressed support, offered the embassy's assistance, pretty standard stuff. He'd also spoken by phone with Mr. Whelan's family, but in the interest of privacy, they weren't providing any more details on the charges or circumstance of the arrest, which, of course, are of great interest.
Right. But there are more details coming to light about Paul Whelan and, in particular, his tenure as a Marine, right? What can you tell us about that?
Well, right. We know he was a former Marine. He served 2 tours in Iraq back in 2004, 2006. The Marine Corps, however, released Whelan's service record, and that showed he was convicted in 2008 of a court-martial on charges related to larceny, given a bad conduct discharge. But his career from there, he goes on to work for law enforcement for a while, and works currently for Borg Warner. This is a Michigan-based company that deals with propulsion engines, where Mr. Whelan is head of global security. Now, BorgWarner has offices in Europe, in China, but not in Russia. That said, Mr. Whalen has traveled to Russia frequently since 2007, and as you noted, his family says he was in town for a wedding.
So, I mean, what are you hearing from people there? Are Russians talking about this, or officials there that you've been able to speak with discussing this in terms of a possible prisoner swap with Maria Butina, the Russian agent who was arrested and charged here in the U.S.?
Well, first of all, it's the middle of the kind of New Year's holidays here, so everything's shut down. But we have kind of a blockbuster story that appeared in the Russian press today in Rostbolk. This is a Russian online newspaper that's pretty well sourced with the security services. And they have what they claim are the first details of Whelan's arrest. They say that Mr. Whelan was caught receiving a flash drive naming Russian intelligence agents in the Metropole Hotel. This is in his hotel room where he was staying for this apparent wedding. And certainly skeptics here in Moscow are discussing the circumstances of this. I mean, the idea of a flash drive in 2019 sounds a bit strange. Did Mr. Whelan even know what was on that flash drive? So there's some who suggest here that it was some kind of setup in a very made-for-TV moment. So essentially wait for this video to be released on state television here in Moscow.
Yeah, interesting, but that Russia is already spinning out this narrative. Reporter Charles Maines in Moscow. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're in a rare moment in Washington, D.C. when President Trump is not the lead news story. Instead, it's the Democrats who've taken over the House of Representatives for the first time in 8 years.
For the first time in 2 years, Democrats have the power to make a move. Under House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they voted to reopen the government and included none of the money President Trump demanded for a border wall.
Is there any situation in which you would accept even $1 of wall funding?
$1? $1. So $1? Yeah, $1.
But she didn't sound very eager to go much higher.
It's a wall between reality and his constituents, his supporters. He does not want them to know what he's doing to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security in his budget proposal. He does not want them to know what he's doing to clean air and clean water and the rest in his Department of Interior and of EPA. He does not want them to know how he is hurting them. So he keeps the subject on the wall. He's a master of diversion.
Pelosi spoke as new lawmakers from both parties settled into the Capitol. Combat veterans, many women, people of color, and others posed for photos, quite dramatic scenes. Late in the day, President Trump emerged from the White House.
I have never had so much support as I have in the last week over my stance for border security, for border control, and for, frankly, the wall or the barrier.
Surveys have shown the demand for a border wall to be unpopular, though it is favored by many of his core supporters.
All right, so we are joined now by NPR's lead political editor, Domenico Montanaro, to get the latest on the shutdown, when it's going to end. He's got all the answers, right, Domenico?
All of them, always.
All the answers. Okay.
How's it going, Rachel?
It goes well. So Nancy Pelosi, one of the first items of business, passing this package of bills to keep the government open, no border wall funding. Is this going to go anywhere?
Not really, because Republicans aren't going to take it up in the Senate. And the president said that he would veto it if it passed Congress. So we're back where we've been. Nancy Pelosi says that what passed was, quote, a mature way out for the president because she's not giving in on the border wall. As we heard her say, she might take $1, but that's about all. And this measure would open the government back up, funding several agencies for a year. It would kick the fight over border funding another month, tied to funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Democrats point out this was basically what Republicans were set to pass before the president reversed course in December.
Well, Republicans up until this point, led by Mitch McConnell, have been fairly unified on this, saying we don't want to take up anything the president's not going to sign. But there appear to be some cracks in that front right now.
There are a couple cracks. At least 2 Republican senators are calling for funding the government without this border wall fight. That's Cory Gardner of Colorado and Susan Collins of Maine. Gardner said that Congress needs to take further action on border security, but that work should be done when the government is fully open. Collins said that the government basically should not be held hostage to this debate over border security. Oh, and by the way, Rachel, both of them are up for re-election in 2020.
Right.
And we've seen Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell want to protect a lot of his members who are up for re-election, but so far he's stayed on the sidelines, and a lot of people think he might be one way out of this because he would be needed to kind of move the impasse forward.
So President Trump came out yesterday. It was supposed to be the first press briefing with Sarah Sanders of the new year. Instead, a surprise visit by the president. What'd he say?
Yeah, it was not a press briefing. Instead, we had the president come out. Seemed to be a direct response to Pelosi returning to the speakership. Congratulated her, but dug his heels in and tried to make the case again for the border wall funding.
All right, NPR's Domenico Montanaro. Domenico, thank you. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
At one point, the president said if Congress doesn't give him the money that he wants to build a border wall, more than $5 billion, he'll just have the U.S. military do it. The president appears to be moving ahead with that idea.
Yeah, the Pentagon is sending more U.S. troops to the border. Their job is to build or upgrade 160 miles of fencing. It's along the border in Arizona and California. Now, bear in mind, those two states are already mostly fenced. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan described the deployment.
The Army Corps of Engineers is dialed in on doing this cost effectively, quickly, and with the right amount of urgency as to where we can build additional stand-up walls quickly and then get after the threat. The threat is real.
Troops will also provide medical care to migrant families.
NPR's Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman joins us this morning. Good morning, my friend.
Hello, Rachel.
So how many troops are we talking about here?
You know, at this point, we don't know. And here's a challenge for the administration. There are about 2,300 active duty troops along the border, together with about 2,000 National Guard troops. Now, the deployment for the active troops wraps up at the end of the month. So they're going to have to make some decisions. Do we extend the current troops? Do we send more troops? And I'm told that for the fencing portion of this, you're looking at more combat engineers. They could possibly be sent. And also, Homeland Security is requesting more medical units as well. Of course, 2 children died along the border in the custody of U.S. officials, so they need additional help. And also, aviation units to provide surveillance along the border. So they're going to have to make some decisions pretty quickly because, again, the deployment wraps up at the end of the month.
Right. And this is in addition to the U.S. troops who were already sent down there to manage the so-called caravan of migrants, right?
That's right.
So it's also happening, obviously, during a partial government shutdown. So where are they going to get the money for this? Is this coming out of the Pentagon's previous budget?
They're getting it from the Pentagon budget. And also the Pentagon has not shut down. They're still working, as we see, along the border. So, there's some grumbling about this at the Pentagon. It's a waste of money, or this is not what you use active duty troops for. This is generally a National Guard mission. So privately, there is some grumbling about this. But they say, listen, this is a legal order from the president. We'll carry it out.
You mentioned decisions are going to have to be made soon. Do we have any idea at this point when we could see troops there on the border actually reinforcing fencing?
Well, I don't have a sense of exactly when they're going to start this mission, but I'm told it could take several months. And this is, it's talking about a lot of mileage here. So this could, require a substantial amount of troops. One official told me a few thousand troops, perhaps. Another said, well, the current troops there could at least start this effort as you bring more troops in. But at this point, I know the Pentagon is working on this, planning this, and we don't have any specifics right yet.
All right, NPR Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman for us this morning. Tom, thanks. We appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, next we're going to turn to Israel, where thousands of new homes for Israeli settlers are being planned in the occupied West Bank.
Most countries denounce Israeli settlements because they're spread out across land that Palestinians demand for their own state. The Trump administration has been tolerant, though, of Israeli settlements. In fact, a watchdog group says there's been a building frenzy in the settlements since President Trump took office.
NPR's Daniel Estrin has been visiting those areas in the West Bank, and he is on the line now. Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning.
What can you tell us about these construction plans?
Well, last week, Israel advanced plans to build nearly 2,800 new settlement homes in the West Bank. And the big picture here, Rachel, is that in the last 2 years, during Trump's presidency, Israel has pushed forward a lot of settlement construction plans. And it's a big difference from the last 2 years of the Obama presidency. This anti-settlement watchdog group you referenced, Peace Now, tracks these numbers. And it says that in Trump's first year of office, the number of housing plans that Israel advanced was about 2.5 times higher than the number in the last year of the Obama administration.
So I mean, it's hard to overstate just how sensitive this issue is, right? I mean, so much of it plays into the history of the region, the identity of the peoples. Can you just explain kind of contextually how important this is for Israelis and Palestinians, rather?
Settlements are at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They're spread out in the West Bank. That's where Palestinians live, and that's where Palestinians want an independent state. And most countries want to see Israel give up at least most of the West Bank for Palestinians to have their own state. And they say that's the only way that there will be a solution to this long-running conflict. And the more Israel builds up its settlements, the more entrenched Israel becomes in that land.
So, as we noted, you've been out visiting some of these very areas where Israel has made these plans, advanced the settlement construction. What have you seen there?
Well, this morning I visited a small village, a Palestinian village called Nahalin. And across the valley is one of the biggest Israeli settlements, and it's growing. You can see the construction vehicles. You can hear the bang, bang, bang of the construction vehicles. They're building a new neighborhood to expand the settlement. And I was surprised they were even working on a Friday, which is a weekend day here. And it's one of 3 settlements that surround this village where Israel has recently announced new planned housing. So the Palestinian mayor of the village said he feels he's being choked. He says this is unjust. And then I drove to the settlement next door, and I met a devout Jewish Israeli there, and he said, well, this construction is good. God promised us this land in the Torah. This is our land. This is not their land. Palestinians don't deserve this land. Arabs have plenty of countries. There's only one Jewish state.
Daniel, I want to note that you said that Israeli settlement construction plans advanced during the Obama administration and the Trump administration, just a little bit slower in the Obama administration. Is the point of view of the Israeli government becoming essentially what that settler told you, that no matter what any U.S. administration says, they're going to go ahead as much as they can?
Well, I think a lot of, especially in the settler community here, they believe that Trump is giving them a green light, whereas Obama gave them a yellow light. I remember being at a Trump election victory party in 2016. Settler activists were drinking Trump-branded vodka. They were hoping Trump would allow this to happen, and it seems the numbers suggest that it is.
All right, NPR's Daniel Estrin for us this morning on these new plans. Israel is planning to construct new Israeli settlements on the West Bank. Daniel, thanks. We appreciate you sharing your reporting with us.
You're welcome.